those two families have been abused by the schools that they went to, and in collusion with the local authorities. Let's name it for what it is. They have been abused. My view, and I've been associated with the families, I have to say I don't think they've been excluded because I hope they've not been excluded because of my association. But what you see and what you hear from these two families and the way in which their children have been treated by the authority, because the authority have allowed this to happen, and by those two particular head teachers from the schools, is abuse, and it should not happen. Now, I'm not here. My name is Joe Whittaker. I'm involved with the Alliance for Inclusive Education. There's some material there. There's a website where you can get all our information about where we are with the green paper and all the strategies and all the information that you need to know. But whatever legislation there is, whatever policies that authorities and schools are adopting, it doesn't seem to stop them acting illegally. And that is one of the issues that I'd really like to raise today. I'm not here to persuade you where your children should go. You don't know my children. You don't know the struggles I have with my children. I don't know your children. So I'm not coming up here to tell you which school your child should go to. You're in a better position to judge. What I am wanting to do is to try and explain how our schooling system gets in the way of learning. I don't believe children have learning difficulties. Schools have learning difficulties. Schools and colleges and universities, I believe, have profound and multiple learning difficulties because they don't learn from the children that they have rejected. Now, the reason why inclusive education, to me, if I live here and my school is there, and it is our school, because what I would do with these two head teachers, by the way, I would sack them. I would sack them. I would say, I'm very sorry. And I'm a fair person. Let's go through the judicial system, the disciplinary procedure that you are subject to. That's the local authority's responsibility. And I'm very sorry, you're sacked. Now, this thing called inclusive education for the last 30 years has been distorted, in my view. I've struggled for many years to push for inclusive education. I now know that we have distorted it. The language of inclusion has been distorted. And I think that we really need to reclaim it and understand what we're talking about. The reason why it is a struggle for some children to get from here to their school there is because people prevent it from happening. They stop it. Now, whilst there is one or two children being excluded from a local school, no child is safe. No child is safe because these children have been excluded illegally. And I would contest very strongly they have been excluded illegally. So if you're going to get rid of these two children, they can get rid of your child. No child is safe. Now, where does this come from? I don't believe that the people in the schools that are teaching in the schools, all the people that are in local authorities, are horrible people. I don't believe that. I don't believe they sit down and say, how can we make the Jackson's family life hell? Because it has been. Or Caroline Leather. Simply because it's a doctor, it doesn't make it any easier. How can we make their life hell? I don't believe people do that. I believe that the systems we operate in actually get people to behave in ways in which they don't want to. So how do we change it? How do we change that? Now, I think there's something about the way in which we train professionals. And I'm not a professional, by the way. I'm not a professional. I gave up that a few years ago. I don't get paid for doing what I'm doing. I do it because I believe it. So I'm not a professional. I'm coming out. I am not a professional. I am a person that's committed to changing the schooling system. Is it the first one, Geraldine?
Yes, it is.
The top one.
Yeah.
Right, so it's a struggle for some, but it's essential for all. So this is about all our kids. All our kids.
Right, hang on to it. It's left or right?
I don't know the left.
Oh, no.
Right, so how we train professionals. And I think there's something about the way in which we train professionals that I think is worrying. Now, this quote here from R.D. Lane, who was a psychologist, but apart from that, he was a really good bloke. He actually called himself a recovery psychologist. There is something I don't know that I'm supposed to know. I don't know what it is I don't know, and yet I'm supposed to know. And I feel I look stupid if I seem both not to know it and not know what it is I don't know. Therefore, I pretend I know it. This is nerve-wracking since I don't know what I must pretend to know. Therefore, I pretend I know everything. And the worrying thing is that we will come in contact with professionals who think they need to know. And the number of people that have emerged as professionals in autism, number of people who are professionals and experts in Down syndrome, or some other, if we don't know what it is, we call it a complex, we call it a syndrome. The idea that anybody can be an expert in autism, well, you're not in my son's name because you never met him. It's like being an expert in people that wear blue jumpers. And you get paid a lot of money for it. So let's dispel this notion that somebody knows about my child until they've had a relationship with them. That's the way you're going to get to know my child. And even then, you know, I don't know from one day to the next. So this idea that we train professionals to actually be all-knowing, they are not. They struggle. So don't pretend. And the number of times I've come across parents who, and I'm talking about parents of children who have been continually assessed and labelled, that defer to somebody because they're a psychologist and say, oh, they know my child better than I do, after a 20-minute assessment. I am not suggesting that psychologists, probably am really, but psychologists don't have something to contribute. Of course they do. If they share with you and they come to understand and get to know your child. Without that relationship, they may as well be writing words on a piece of paper that have no meaning. And it's wonderful to be in front of any... No, I'm not going to ask for any psychologist. But I think one of the good things about psychologist reports, and I've been there, where, you know, the report that has been written about a child that the parent has no bearing. Has no bearing. And this is not just an educational psychologist. It might be a statement of special educational needs, for example. It's not a reflection of who my child is, because my child is not a label. My child is a human being who has something to contribute, and the reports can be ripped.
Yeah.
This thing called disability, special education needs, the whole language, we've made it so much more cumbersome and complicated and hard work. All what I want is for my child to go from that school, from that place to school, and to have friends. But disability is the loss or limitation of the ability to take part in ordinary life on an equal basis as others due to the physical and social barriers. It has nothing whatsoever to do with my child's impairment. It has nothing to do with whether my child has one arm, two arms, one eye, no eye, whether or not he experiences the world in a different way. It is how people respond to him or her and how we construct the barriers. We construct them. You know, children don't come with barriers. Children don't want to have people stopping them from doing things. People want to engage. People want to relate. People want to but relate on their terms. And simply because they don't fit the rules and they're seen as different, they're often kept out. And it's what do we do to change that? So this is not about the child. This is about the response to the child and what our schooling system does to prevent and inhibit and devalue. Because one of the things that so often happens when we label our children, and there's lots of arguments, I'm not going to go into the arguments of why we shouldn't label. I think, you know, Sophie's a good start. That's the name of the child. The idea that we label, and we're labelled in the expectation that we're going to get the support they require. It's often the support that other people think they require, not what they do require. So the label and the name, if they want to give the child the label, start off with the name. Get to know my Sophie, get to know my Emily, get to know my Jim, get to know my David, get to know my Nazarene. And then inclusion, this thing called inclusion. What is inclusion? It's about being wanted, belonging. And the one thing that local authorities and schools can't do, they can't give people inclusion. They can't say, you're fully included. People have to feel it. And they might have a wonderful inclusion policy, and many of them do. Pristine inclusion policies. But if I don't feel it, I'm not included. And that's for me a very important question in much of the work I do. Johnny, there's a glass of water. I'm stopping speaking. That it's how do we actually welcome our kids. And when we talk about we need more training for the professionals and we need more expertise, and I think, great, okay, but what training do you need to welcome my kid into school? So my kid feels welcome, my kid feels a part. What do you need to do? And, you know, a lot of people will actually say that, you know, if my kid feels welcome and a part of this on their own terms, I can go with a lot of other rubbish that you're throwing at me. But that sense of you don't want my child is crucifying. And I speak as an atheist. It's crucifying. And nobody can actually understand the pain that people can experience when you say you do not want my child. And I don't believe that schools can be complete until all kids are welcome. I may not know what to do with you. I may not understand you. But you're welcome. And if somebody gets in the way, if a professional gets in the way, my option is, you're being paid to be here, you have a choice. My child has a right to be here, they don't. You go. Get somebody else in. And if you think I'm being cruel, I am. Staff room comments. I've been a teacher for 35 years, although I'm retired. And I spent a lot of time asking myself, why did I want to teach? And I've taught in special schools, I've taught at the secondary mainstream schools, and the last 27 years training teachers to try and get teachers to adapt curriculum, not kids. Not fix kids. Kids don't need fixing. They need valuing for who they are. Accept them for who they are. And when I hear behaviour, well, we've got to have behaviour modification, it makes me boil. Because many of the youngsters, I don't believe behaviour. Behaviour is a word that we should get rid of. We should be talking about responses to certain contexts. And particularly when you're engaged with youngsters who have got this label of autism, it's wonderful. It's a wonderfully creative way of seeing the world. But we screw it out of people. So accept my child for who my child is and change in order to accommodate my child. And if you need to take the walls down with the school, take them down. Get rid of them. My child is more important than your walls. And when I wanted to teach, and it took me a very long time to ask myself why I wanted to teach. And the reason why I wanted to teach was because I wanted to see what it was like inside the staff room. Because when I was a kid, there, down here, knock on the door opened that much. Okay? Somebody stood there with a cup of tea. Used to smoke in the place. You don't smoke anymore. Very, very. And I used to look through there and think, wow, their world. That's a world for me. They're there to make my world wonderful. They walked on water, these teachers. They were separate from me. They were of another order. Empty mouth Whittaker was, and I would, even though I wasn't bloody chewing. I would actually conform in such a very powerful way. And then, when they expelled me from that school, I realised they didn't know I was. They had no idea who I was. Thought that was the teacher coming in then. But now I used to go to a lot on teaching practice, train teachers and observe them in the classrooms, and I still used to get stomachache going into the staff room. But anyway, I was invited into the staff room. I sat in the staff room overhearing conversations, and you might say, here you are, a visitor in the classroom, overhearing conversations, taking something out of the conversation, bringing it here and putting it on an acetate and using it against them. That's what I'm doing. But Mary, if I explained it once, I must have explained it 100 times, and still she didn't understand. You see, I'm the teacher, you're the pupil, I explain it, you understand it. If you don't understand it, you've got a problem. There lies the problem. There lies the problem. And if I explain it 100 times, and you don't, you've got a bigger problem. Not the fact that I might explain it in a way that may not be understandable, or inappropriate, or not worth explaining anyway, but you have got a problem if you don't listen or understand what I'm saying. If there's any teachers in the room and you've sort of never heard such a comment, fine, you know. I told this mother if she wanted him included, he'll do the rest of the other kids. I do that so often. Right, treating kids the same is not treating them equally. Children need to be treated differently and supported differently. They want to feel the same. They want to feel the same as the other kids, but they wanted to be treated differently, and it was wonderful to hear, you know, you're different as a child. Get over it. Enjoy it. It's when other people start to respond to you in a negative way, that becomes problematic. And I, again, as a kid, 8 years old, single parent family, I went from 8 till 13 pretending that I had a dad. Because I wanted to have a mum and dad in school. And I pretended, I lied. I lied because I wanted to be the same. So the idea, you know, would treat the kids the same, and it's often a threat. If you want your child included, they're going to do the same as all the others. They're going to suffer the same as everybody else. Now, I'm exaggerating the point to illustrate the point. She has all the support she needs, and she still complains. Carry on complaining. Because if your child is not supported in a way that you know the child should be supported, and you may not always know, complain. And complain in a way that is nice. You don't have to be offensive. Sometimes you might. But it's actually, support only works if support is only support if it works for your child. If it's what other people think is support, it's not working. It's not support. Call it what you like. So the idea that somehow we've tried everything. You'll hear people say, we've tried everything, still didn't work. You haven't. Because if it's not working, you've not tried it. Try something different. Go down another route. Now, I always think it's important to hear what kids say. Kids, You don't have to agree with them, but we have to find a way of hearing what kids say. There's just 3 comments here. Because I've matched the 3 comments, I've reduced this quite significantly. The 3 comments from kids. I think God's silly. He should have painted everybody the same colour and then people wouldn't fight. That's something about being the same. I like differences. I like people being different sizes, different shapes, different colours, different smells. I think that's why we come to learn about ourselves, by the differences in others, and accepting the differences in ourselves. But you can understand where the sentiment comes of wanting to be the same, because I don't want to stick out because I'm not going to be treated differently. And again, I don't mind, people will be treated differently. It's being treated differently in a negative way. My mother says she's cold and makes me put my coat on. My mother says she's cold and makes me put my coat on. Because, you know, it's very important to recognise that you are doing a lot of things that may not necessarily, your children may not be interested in. And that's fine. Because what else have you got? And you could be wrong. Because they're going to blame you for it anyway. You know, later on. They're going to blame you for something. So they may as well be blaming you for doing things in what you think is their interest. But that's all you've got. And I think this is one of the things that local authorities and schools don't understand. They don't get. Because if you're not doing right by your child as you see it, I know people that have travelled to the other side of the world, to the other side of the country. They've gone to all sorts of therapists, they've tried everything. They won't give up. So the idea of taking them on as an enemy is a complete waste of a resource. Engage and understand. Find out where people are coming from. Work with them. Listen. And listen can be very difficult because it might mean you have to change. And then the last one. You have to love your own baby because everyone else finds them a nuisance. And that was Patrick, who was 8. You have to love your own baby because everyone else finds them a nuisance. And that's true. I think that's true. Nobody is going to be concerned about your child as you are. Even members within your extended family. And they'll say it. And they'll say when you go to the local authority and you go to the school and you sit down and you say, oh, well, we're all, you know, let's not forget. I want to vomit when I hear this. Let's not forget the focus is this child. It's stating the bloody obvious. But they don't love the child as you do. They don't have the feeling. You know, they don't have, I know parents who, for example, who were originally professionals and then they had a child who then, the child acquired an impairment or had an impairment. They you can listen to. They will have some empathy and understanding. But it's still different from your child. And we can't get away from this. If somebody has a child and are concerned about that child, go with them. You don't have to agree with them, but go with them. They may be wrong, but go with them. And allow people to come to an understanding and a way forward that works for them and their families. And if you need to change the school, change the school. Change it. Now, most people will agree with this. They'll say, yeah, but they still can't come in. And I ask myself, sorry, you can't come in. You know, this Ed. Sorry. That's before they've met the kid. But we've had the statement. We've had the report. We've had the label. We've had news. You recognise this, don't you? You do recognise it, don't you? How could she be anything other than an asset to a classroom? So sorry you can't come in. We don't have the money. Right? Now, you may have not noticed that there's a recession on. Right? So we're told. So we're told. I've been involved with these issues for the last 30 odd years, 35 years. 1974. My maths is never very good. 74. One of the things I've experienced in this particular area, nobody, as I know, has ever had money, so that, you know, you're never going to say, what do you need? How much do you need? You can have it, you can have it. Even at times with so-called plenty. It's always been a struggle. It's always been an issue. We can't afford it. Well, I would say you never get into a conversation about whether we can afford it or not. This is not about money. This is not about money. And when an head teacher or a local authority, well, they usually don't say it. Well, they might say it in private with consenting adults. But this is not about money. We still invest a huge amount of money in segregating people. We spend a lot of money in keeping people out. And when they often look at alternatives, it's often much more expensive. But it's, for me, I'm an Oscar Wilde fan. The cost of everything but the value of nothing. You may actually be able to work out how much it's going to cost my child being here. But you will never work out the cost to this school and this society by excluding them. Because you cannot put a price on it. Never talk about money. Never talk about money. Talk about what your child requires. And one of the worries I have about the new legislation coming through is that they're talking about giving individual budgets. Well, it might look promising, but if you have no control over what service you're going to get, money can be nothing. So I would say never talk about money, talk about what your child requires. We're not the experts. Be suspicious of experts. Be suspicious of people who allow themselves to be called experts. Because they're not an expert in your child. They don't know them. And when they do know them, they'll recognise just how much they've got to learn. I am not against expertise. I am not against people saying, I've got a particular contribution to make here. I want to assist. I'm not against that. I'm against people who are presented as being all-knowing about a particular child or a particular group of children. What about the other children? I think it's offensive. I think it's offensive that schools will say your child can't come in because it adversely affects learning of others. And that's the only caveat that they can actually use to keep a child out, legally. That is the only caveat they can use. Your child will adversely affect the learning of others. It's offensive. My child will actually contribute to the learning of others. Your child will contribute to the learning of mine. If my child is responding in a way that's hurting your child, we must stop that. We must stop that. No child wants to be, no parent wants their child to be hurt. Of course they don't. But the idea is this child is adversely affecting the learning of others, so let's take him out of that school and put him in that school where he can adversely affect the learning of those kids. It's a nonsense. You have to be realistic. You don't. You should not be realistic. Because you know the reality for your situation, in your situation, and how we should change things. You know, it used to be realistic to send kids up chimneys. It used to be realistic when women were not allowed to go to university in the 1870s. Women were not. Women were banned from university. The reason why women were banned from university is because it would affect their reproductive system. And it would stop them having babies. They would have hysteria. It would bring a downfall in society. It took women 8 years to get into university. Universities have got a lot to learn. So we don't need to be realistic. We know the reality. We know that you have rejected my child. That is unacceptable. This has never been done before, you know. It's never been done. We've never included a child in here that's sort of seen as different. And people believe that. You know what we're talking about, and it's already been in terms of differentiation, in terms of adaptation, in terms of changing the curriculum, in terms of changing our teaching methods, has been happening for 30 years for lots of kids. And I come across families whose kids are really struggling, avoiding being rejected. And, you know, in another school across the street, you know, kids are being fully included and a part of. It's not your child that's different as the problem. And they're not the only one. But the way in which you do it, blame the child, blame the parents, blame the family, isolate, marginalise, reject. Works all the time. Divide and rule. And even if you are the first one, go for it. Go for it. Why shouldn't you? What other option do you have? And we don't have the mainstream ready yet. Now, one of the things, I wrote an article probably about 10 years ago now, which I've changed that. Why special schools should close. And I believe that. I do believe kids should belong to the local school. Why special schools should close. I then wrote an article, oh no, I've not written it yet. I should have written it, why schools should close. And then I've changed again. It's not that schools should close. Schools should be open 24 hours a day. 365 days a year. So should the schools, so should the colleges, so should the universities. Be available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You know, in terms of the overall resource of learning capacity, it's 16%. We use 16% of the resource locked into those schools, universities and colleges. So, take away the key. Open them up. And then people that are doing home tuition can actually use the resources. People who have kids that wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, wanting to do all sorts of things. Great. Could you imagine going over to, well, we'll use that facility. People who want to do studies on insomnia. Brilliant. People who want to look at the sky at night or Skype with people in Australia. Why? And why should it stop at 20 odd? Why? It's nonsense. And surely you don't mean everyone should be included. If they're breathing, they should have a right to be included. If they're not breathing, we need to support them with their breathing. They have a right. They have a right to belong. The unfortunate thing is that we have local authorities that are increasingly not supporting the rights of people to belong. And in fact, we know from the various reports we've got schools that are acting illegally. Illegally. If you were doing it, you'd have social services on you. But schools doing it almost with impunity. The idea that time, Jodie. How long have we got? 5 minutes?
Yeah.
5 minutes? 5 minutes, yeah. 5 minutes? Right, okay. Now, I am angry. I am angry. But I'm not an aggressive person. And I know when I go to schools and I get angry at the injustice, it makes me feel sick, physically sick, that in 2012, after 30 years of legislation, you've got the Leather family and you've got the Jacksons here that have had their children rejected. Because no matter what you call it, it's rejected. And I all come to understand that within schools, that within a school, within a local authority, you can have absolute, for your child, you can have absolutely anything they want, they need, when they need it, how they need it, as long as it matches with what the school, the authority are prepared to provide. As soon as you want something that's different, whatever it is, as soon as you want something different, you become a problem. And you become a problem, as soon as you become a problem or your child becomes a problem, you can be marginalised. And one of the ways to combat what's happening to these two families, and I suspect it is widespread, the way in which you combat that is to have parent groups or allies. They don't have to be parents, you know. People that recognise the struggle and that this injustice is not good for any child. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for our society, because you're never going to have an inclusive society if you've got a segregated school. And this is much bigger than our children. You know, I'm talking about also what we're going to be doing for kids in the next 2 generations. We need to learn from our kids now. And because our child may experience the world in a different way, means that we've got a lot more to learn. Never apologise for your child. Never apologise for them being present. Never apologise for who they are. Get people to change, and by actually forming with allies, challenging with allies, we're more likely. Because let's face it, we've had legislation in racial discrimination, sexual discrimination for many, many, many years. It doesn't stop racism, it doesn't stop sexism. Simply because we're going to have the legislation coming up from the Green Paper and the present government who think there's a bias towards inclusion anywhere. There's more children being segregated in mainstream schools than there are in special schools. So simply getting into a mainstream school, that doesn't make it right. Because lots of people are segregated and isolated, even in their local schools. There's a big job to be done. You can't do it alone. Never go alone. Never go to a meeting alone. Go with people you trust. And be prepared to change the world. Big job. But it's been done. Has been done. And we've got no choice. So good luck. Do whatever you do.